I want to especially welcome the special guest, presenters, and the participants today at this launch. When I was asked to chair this meeting today, I really accepted it without hesitation. I'm very passionate about, public opinion research to give a voice to ordinary people, and particularly those marginalized and deprived communities. It is against this background that I really feel that hands off our grants, defending the constitutional right to social protection, is without a doubt, I think, a remarkable piece of work that not only provided voice to ordinary people, but it made a real difference in their lives and to many South Africans, particularly those who are receiving grants and those who are in need of grants. I also think this book showed that through collective and engaged citizenship, one can make a real difference. And this work, I think, forms another platform for future work because our country, I think people would agree that there's still many work needed to transform our society on many fronts. So I want to really, in this brief note of welcoming, congratulate the Black Sash and the many people that contributed to this publication. It's indeed really a significant and a very, very good read. Turning to today's proceedings, we're going to have a number of presenters, and then afterwards we will have a question and answer session. So I want to, say all the best to the presenters. And what I'll do is I'll introduce each speaker, and then they will have about 10 minutes approximately to do their presentation. And then we will only allow questions, at the end, because we've got quite a number of people to speak. Okay. So it gives me great pleasure then to welcome the first speaker, Ivasni Naidu of Black Sash. She's the KZN Regional Manager, and she will talk about the social grant beneficiaries and particularly their experiences. So most of the presenters today would really reflect on the book. Thank you. Ivasni, over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. In terms of my role today, as Mr. David has said, it's just to share a little bit about the summary of the beneficiaries' experiences. In terms of the way the book is written, chapter 1 of our book focuses directly on the experiences of beneficiaries who recount their harrowing experiences at the disappearance of their meager grant amounts through unauthorized and irregular deductions. They list deductions for electricity, airtime, funeral policies, and loans that they had not authorized. They also describe how in 2015, Net1 had launched its Easy Pay Everywhere or EPE bank accounts to facilitate debit and USSD deductions for financial products from Net1 subsidiaries, with dire consequences for grant recipients due to the depletion of their grants. My role today is to summarize some of these experiences shared and the implications that it had for beneficiaries and the systemic issues in the payment of grants and recourse. While the chapter on beneficiaries has a myriad of cases, we've just selected a few to give you some of the highlights of what beneficiaries actually went through in terms of the journey that we've traveled together in the launch of this book. The primary deductions that we want to speak about is the EPE deductions, which I've just shared came about as a result of the inception and the launch of the EPE current bank account card by Net1, which many of us in lay terms would call it the green card. And this card was launched purely because it wanted to facilitate the sale of moneyline loans, smart life funeral policies, and Manje mobile electricity and airtime deductions. By June 2016, there were 1.1 million EPE cardholders. As the SASSA branded Grindrod card was about to expire in 2017, beneficiaries were lured onto this EPE card under the pretense that this green card was going to be an alternative to the SASSA card, and that the loans that were available under this EPE card were actually granted by SASSA itself. CPS agents that were working at paypoints were salespersons of Net One financial products, such as Smart Life funeral policies. The agents signing up the beneficiaries for an EPE bank account had automatic access via a card chip to the personal and biometric data of the grant beneficiary. EPE card accounts were opened from the boots of cars, at private residences, and in vehicles by agents who earned commission on each aggressively marketed EPE card. The terms and conditions of this bank account were not made available and were not explained to beneficiaries, and the paperwork in small print was obviously only in English. The terms and conditions of the EPE card referred to EPE branches where accounts could be closed. In reality, there were no walk-in EPE branches where a beneficiary could close an account. In desperation, some beneficiaries actually had to visit Net One offices in an attempt to obtain a bank statement to understand where their monies were going to and also to try and close their EPE card accounts. This often involved traveling long distances, as there were only 120 Net One offices in the entire country. For rural grant beneficiaries, this was particularly onerous and costly, and it put the burden of recourse on the beneficiary in order to close these accounts. Another pivotal case for the Black Sash was the story of Ma Grace. Ma Grace was a pensioner who lived in Makwasi, which is a small grain-producing town 120 kilometers south of Johannesburg, and Ma Grace received an old age pension. In November 2013, she saw that 99 Rand had been deducted from her bank account for airtime. Now, Ma Grace did not own a cell phone, so she couldn't understand why this deduction was coming out. There were subsequent deductions up until February 2014, all in the name of airtime. And again, Ma Grace couldn't understand why this was happening. Ma Grace then decided to seek help from the Liberland Community Advice Office in her town. And there she was advised to go to the SASSA local office to query what was happening on her account. When she got to the SASSA office, the SASSA official actually blamed Ma Grace's relatives from taking the money from her account and abusing it and using it for airtime. And they made no further attempt to actually resolve this matter. The advice office that Ma Grace had approached then tried to call the CPS helpline to find out who had bought airtime for her. While CPS could furnish the cell phone number that Ma Grace's deductions were going to, they could not trace the name that was associated to the person that was deducting these amounts from her account. Now, the number that was provided to Ma Grace did not belong to any family member in Ma Grace's household. So you can see how the fact that this official was actually saying that it was her relatives was actually a misnomer, and it wasn't true. The CPS official actually stated that Ma Grace had provided this cell number on her initial application, which she denied because, as we stated, Ma Grace did not have her own cell phone. Eventually, Ma Grace and the Liberland Community Advice Office approached our Gauteng regional office in order to deal with this issue because of the amounts that had been deducted. The Black Sash officers advised Ma Grace to open a criminal case with SAPS and to then complete an affidavit to note the facts. On the 26th of February 2014, after reporting these alleged unlawful deductions to SASSA, the then Minister of Department of Social Development, Batabili Dlamini, instructed her staff to refund Ma Grace with immediate effect. This, the full story is also captured in chapter 2 in our book, and you can read more about it, and my other colleagues on the panel will also speak a little bit more about how we managed to get a refund in this case. The next case that I want to touch on is Mr. Barney. For those of us that are intimately acquainted with the story of Mr. Barney, you'll realize what a persistent, courageous elderly man this was, who couldn't understand why money was being deducted from his account. His case is very complex and very laid, so I cannot go through it in detail, and you're more than welcome to read about it in the book. But it just shows that the perseverance that it had to be taken by a beneficiary in order to try and get refunds from their matter, and how they were pushed from pillar to post by officials and by corporate entities who refused to give them their refunds, despite the fact that they were the actual victims of the fraud on their accounts. Mr. Barney lived in Nyanga, Cape Town, and he received a state old age pension of 1,440 Rand at the time. He usually withdrew his grant money from his SASSA-branded Grindrod bank account at Shoprite in Claremont, Cape Town. In September 2015, When he went to withdraw his grant, he discovered that he only had half the amount that he was entitled to, which was a total of 723 Rand and 47 cents. Now, Mr. Barney admits he had taken a microfinance loan from a lender, Kuyasa Fund, to build a wall, because in his words, these youngsters keep on jumping over my fence. The loan deduction from Kuyasa was 394.9 cents a month, and it started in 2015. However, by the following year, a further monthly deduction of 307 Rand 24. So further deductions had occurred, and by September of that year, Mr. Barney had an amount of 1,843 Rand and 44 cents deducted from his account over and above what he had already paid. When he tried to find out what these unexplained loan deductions were for, he couldn't find proper reasons. He visited the SASSA office in Nyanga, who then sent him to SASSA Guguletu, who then referred him to the Guguletu Paralegal Advice Office. And there he was sent to the CPS office in Lansdowne in order to find out what was going on. When they were able to draw a bank statement for him, he realized that there were deductions coming off his account for an entity named Infaj Fin. Now, Mr. Barney didn't understand what this meant, and so he then was sent by CPS to their office in Belleville to identify who was withdrawing this amount, and it then turned out to be Finland. Mr. Barney refused to give up. He wanted to find out what was actually going on, and he continued to try and struggle to find out by going to various SASSA offices, to the point of even lodging a criminal case at SAPS in Kales River with regard to his matter, even though he didn't get any joy out of them. He eventually came to the Black Sash offices in Mowbray and spoke to our office and our team there. At this point, he himself had, to personal cost, lost about 400 to 500 Rand in terms of airtime, taxis, petrol, and his personal time, just running around in order to try and assess what was going on. Eventually, we escalated this case to the ministerial task team, and even though the senior officials at SASSA tried to intervene, they themselves were not able to get involved and cleared the matter out, even though they did try and reverse the transactions. When the initial amounts were cleaned out, he then had subsequent deductions coming out from Mercantile Bank, where some gentleman by the name of Petrus had taken a loan out, but because of the incorrect digit in that account number, the money was being deducted from Mr. Barney's account as opposed to the gentleman who had actually taken the loan. And this shows how even other beneficiaries can actually create situations where unauthorized deductions can come out of other beneficiaries' accounts, and nobody comes forward to actually own up to that. And then in terms of class action matter, Trans-African Life is where we found young people going out from door to door in a community in Tweefontein, Pampshanga, where they were targeting people that were on older persons grant and permanent disability grants, and were telling them that they would be entitled to food parcels if they were able to give them their ID numbers, proof of address, contact details, and name of a dependent. Eventually, by August of that same year, 2016, people then noticed funeral deductions were coming out of their accounts, and they never received any food parcels. When the Black Sash and the community partner, Kwedisizi Home-Based Care, intervened and investigated the matter, we realized that these individuals were unethical brokers who were actually signing up funeral policies for a company called Trans-Africa Life, and were using the food parcels as the entryway to getting the personal details of beneficiaries. So, long story short.
Okay, we seem to have lost Ivasini, but I think she was trying to wrap up. So let's just give it 1 second to see if she's going to come back. Otherwise, we will start with the next presentation. I think what we'll do is we'll start with the next presentation and give Ivasini during the question and answer session an opportunity to add. But I think that was really insightful in terms of the experiences of the beneficiaries. So let's go on to the next presenter, which is Lynette Mart. She's a former Black Sash National Director, and she's going to share with us an overview of the book. Lynette, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. David. Can people hear me?
No, the microphone. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Davis. Perhaps I just want to say greetings to all and all protocol observed. And it gives me great pleasure to present to you sort of a bit of an overview of the workbook, the entity and other strategies that were deployed by the Black Sash. When we thought about the book, we had many ways to enter this book, but we thought, let's stay true to the process. So the book structure flows from how the Hands of Our Grants campaign organically evolved. And grant beneficiaries knocked on our doors. They knocked on the doors of the advice officers, of the CBOs across the country seeking recourse. And Ivashni introduced us well to some of their stories and the many challenges that they face, ending with no recourse and no refunds, and to great cost to themselves. And she spoke about both the individual cases, but also the group cases, particularly around funeral policies that we found in Trans Life and in Mpumalanga, and also in Franz Hoek, another company there that did a similar thing of deducting from people's grant bank accounts. Now, we wrote an open letter to various government departments in December 2013, paving the way for a meeting with former Minister Dlamini, DSD and SASSA senior teams in February 2024. And this meeting led to the establishment of a ministerial task team. Kolibe, that's your note. And on the task team, we also wrote a chapter on this, but the task team was formed to look at the unauthorized, fraudulent and unlawful deductions from social grants. Until this point, SASSA, Cash Pay Master Services and DSD blamed grant beneficiaries, members of their families and household, for these debit order and USSD platform deductions from their SASSA branded Grindrod bank account. At the time, SASSA placed large adverts in print media and on national television, encouraging beneficiaries to protect their cards and their PINs, rethinking aloud, as if this was going to stop the deductions. Black Sash and civil society partners, including Kawusa, joined the MTT, and we said on two conditions. One, that we will not give up our advocacy role, and that unless stated upfront, all information generated through this process will be treated as if it's public. 5 strategic demands guided our engagements, including to stop all unauthorized, allegedly unlawful and fraudulent deductions, hold those accountable, put in place a proper recourse and refund system, insource the social grant, and set up an inspectorate. At the first meeting, as Ivashni stated, my grace was refund for airtime deductions from PBEL. And this opened the door for a SASSA controlled recourse and refund system. And the MTT report summarized, the first one summarized it as follows. The big sharks in suits are now in the tank with seemingly legal access to the SASSA branded bank accounts, cards, and beneficiaries' personal and confidential information. And the little sharks are relegated a distance from the pay points with insecure repayment, illegally detaining cards, often threatening recipients with violence, and more likely to be prosecuted by SAPS and the National Credit Regulator. In essence, the big sharks have effectively eliminated the competition, but are not being held criminally liable. So the entity worked through issues like trying to secure a directive from the South African Reserve Bank, a SASSA-owned and controlled recourse system, dealing with the funeral deductions cleanup, regulations to the social assistance, to steady these deductions from particularly children's grants and temporary grants, and the intractable problem of insourcing social grant payments to SASSA. As no new service provider was appointed in 2015 following the Concord order in the all-pay case, CPS continued with the SASSA contract to the end of 31 March 2017. And in October 2015, the Concord terminated its oversight role. The movement continued slowly, and a SASSA-owned and controlled ecosystem seemed far out of reach. It was only when the SAPO ring-fence bank account in 2018 came to fruition that we began to see a recourse mechanism that went quite far in resolving the recourse and refunds to people. The regulations were challenged by Net1, subsidiaries and allies, and by September 2016, almost a year later, SASSA had failed to deliver the in-source plan with clear deliverables and timeframes. The Minister advised at the time that she was appointing work streams to assist government with the implementation of future grant payments. And media articles that were reported at the time suggest that the CPS contract might be extended. So in February 2017, the Black Sash launched an urgent court case application, which Gina Snyman, under the chapter heading, with campaign strategic litigation, will talk about. This action terminated the operation of the entity. I will also leave it to Craig to talk to us about the evolving understanding of the Net1 business model and the implication of SASSA and the CPS private-public partnership. And in this instance, we're talking about how that impact on the right to social security. The chapter on tackling state capture at SASSA, the Public Affairs Research Institute, PARI, published a research piece that was titled The Contract State, Outsourcing and Decentralization in Contemporary South Africa. South Africa has become a contract state, it's argued, and state institutions are being hollowed out as key functions are being outsourced. In May 2017, the State Capacity Project published a report titled The Betrayal of the Promise, which introduces to us the notion of state capture and help us grapple with that concept and its implications in our country. A further case study by Robin Foyle and Mark Swilling, titled How One Word Can Change the Game, a case study of state capture and the South African Social Security Agency, help us make sense of the constitutional invalid SASSA CPS contract, the tender process, the parallel structures, and the negative impact and consequences for the poorest and the most vulnerable in the country. Lessons from this chapter include SASSA's dependency on a sole private service provider with an extreme wide scope to pay social grants and with no proper control and supervision. Another issue that came up was that former Minister Dlamini had assumed the de facto Chief Accounting Officer role of SASSA, and that there was a need for better role definition between the SASSA CEO and the Minister of Social Development. And Robin will tell us about her new book, The Anatomy of State Capture, during the question session. Now, Parliament is mandated to conduct oversight of national departments and state organs. In the chapter on parliamentary oversight of SASSA, we track the Parliament's performance. So in 2010, MPs note issues, but increasingly from April 2012, MPs start to ask questions about a certain company that was offering loans to pensioners. They deduct fees, in brackets, loan repayments and interest from social grants before they are paid out to the pensioners. CEO Virginia Peterson at the time reported in the annual report that there were a lot of complaints ongoing around deductions from the SASSA branded Grindrod bank account. This chapter focuses on Parliament's role. Sorry, I've just lost my track. Let me go back. Yeah. On the respective efforts by the Portfolio Committee of Social Development in SCOPA to hold SASSA DSD, and in particular the Minister of Dlamini to account for the CPS contract, its termination, the 2017 social grant crisis, the transition to SAPO contract towards a long-term strategy to insource the payment of social grants. The effective functioning of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development, its instruments for oversight and accountability, as well as its impact on social development and the delivery of social grants, was brought into serious question. Ultimately, the Constitutional Court held Minister Dlamini to account. In the chapter on the Black Sash's advocacy through partnership, reflects on several methods deployed by the Sash and its strategic and community partners. And these include community monitoring with our partners across the country to gather evidence and compile them into reports on the quality of service delivery, and SASSA was one of these focuses. The mobilization that includes the mobilization that includes speak outs, protests. There was a protest in St. George's Cathedral, Maponya Mall, Grindrod offices, the speak outs that also included government department officials in Adelaide, Kotze House, Franshoek, etc. There's an interesting piece on shareholder activism, and Anne Crotty, who's here in the audience, wrote, perhaps the researchers at Alan Gray, the country's fourth largest fund manager, need to get out of the ivory towers a bit more, because those who do not get out and talk to the 17 million recipients of social grant find that there's a lot to be concerned about Net1's handling of the contract. The public outcry resulted in meetings with Alan Gray, and a direct result of that was 2 recourse refunds meetings with social grant beneficiaries in Ceres. And in both of these instances, Net1 agents, SASSA, DSD was in attendance, and we've also had people being refunded in that. The Grant Grips documentary that was aired on special assignments and Cutting Edge also galvanized public support. And so we need to acknowledge the role played by the media as crucial in the deduction saga, in the court cases. And we carry these interesting statements and their role throughout the book with many articles. So we must thank all the agencies and the journalists who made it their business to cover the story, and in fact to profile, almost bring social grants from the backwaters into front and center. And these reports contributed to the public recognizing the importance of social protection, particularly social grants. PARI, when they did the Black Sash evaluation in 2018, state that through the work campaign, the Black Sash had applied a unique method of activism that is grounded in an understanding and evidence through case studies and the application of a mixed strategies of community mobilization, negotiation with government, and litigation as a last resort. This approach may be an alternative to the current more violent methods that are currently occurring in South Africa. It is important, therefore, that it is documented and the lessons learned indicated that this be used to teach and inform young activists. And finally, the book makes talk about the way forward, but it confirms the Black Sash's ongoing commitment to human rights, justice, dignity, and carrying this legacy into its 70th decade of struggle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynette, for that inspirational talk and providing us with a good overview of the book. And you've mentioned the role of the media. And my next presenter is a journalist. We want to welcome Craig Nkune, who is going to talk about cash payment services and Net1, Applied Technology Holdings Limited, and their role in this entire process. So welcome, Craig. The floor is over to you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And hi, everyone. How's my mic technique? Can the people on Zoom hear me okay?
I can hear you
Sounding
well.
good. Okay. My name's Craig McEwen, and back in 2011, when SASA went out to tender for this contract that Net1 won, I was an investigative journalist working with an investigative non-profit called Amabungani. I'd like to try and say one main thing here with my little bit of time that I have with you. And I'm not sure if I've boiled it down simply enough. I've got too many bullets here. But what I've got here is that Net1 and certain political people secured access to the state. They provided the rationale that they were serving the public interest, but their actual reason or motive was private. Net1 wanted to profit massively, and various political actors wanted to maintain or gain access to power. And in the process, the social grant system was perverted and people were harmed. And that's the story that I reported on from 2011 till about 2017, where I took my leave from this one. But the private interest was put ahead of the public interest. That's my point. And as we speak, in another sphere where I'm investigating today, a financial sector lobby group is writing rules for a governance system that is supposed to do something essential for many, many people. But the rules are being written by bankers whose first motive is to profit from the situation. And the risk is presented that the system is going to be perverted in the process, and that many people will once again be harmed. And this is a situation that happens all the time around the world, in every country. And we know it very well from South Africa. All of the stories that have come out of the Zondo Commission and out of reporting on state capture, and before the so-called state capture era, this is a story that we know well as South Africans. And I wonder what it'll take for us to put a stop to that. I think it's important for us to understand how this Net1 story unfolded, for example, and how the social grants process was perverted, so that we can see when it happens elsewhere, and maybe we can act sooner and more strongly to prevent it. But going back to the social grant system, the transaction was supposed to be simple. Taxpayers would pay the government, and the government would use that money to provide an essential service, in this case, distributing social grants. But unfortunately, our government doesn't know how to do that, and it doesn't have the equipment to do that, nor the people. So it chose to pay a private company, Net1, to distribute the grants. So this is the contract-based state that we spoke about earlier. Even so, that sounds simple enough. And if you read Net1's contracts with the South African government, this was supposed to be simple. South Africa would pay Net1 a few billion rand, and Net1 would use its trucks, its gadgets, its people, and its knowledge to distribute grants to people. And quite explicitly, Net1 was not to use this government granted access to billions of people for any other purpose than to distribute grants. But it did. And that shouldn't be a surprise, because that was always the plan, no matter what the contract said. It was always Net1's plan. You see, the financial sector profits from transactions, withdrawals, deposits, trades, fees, interest, airtime, electricity, and so on. And they can fatten up those profit lines by selling clients more financial products like loans and insurance. And the more people use the financial system to transact, the more money banks and others can make. So their motive is to scale markets. They want transaction volume and liquidity. Those hundreds of thousands of people, some of you sitting in this room, many of our friends, some of us who do not have access to bank accounts, are an opportunity to be won or lost by the financial sector. Those people, you, we, our friends and family, are a market for the financial sector, and the banks want to access those unbanked people. So this is where South Africa's decision to outsource grant distribution was a big chance for bankers. And that is why other banks, besides Net1, tried very, very hard to get access to what Net1 eventually won, the privilege to bank the unbanked, as Net1 put it in their lobbying and advocacy. It was always Net1's plan. Long before this contract, its family of companies was distributing social grants in certain provinces, where simultaneously they would sell loans and insurance to grant beneficiaries on the days that they were paid. And Net1 always explained the strategy very clearly to its investors, who included such esteemed institutions as the World Bank Group and Alan Gray. The strategy was a two-wave process. The first wave was to gain access to a critical mass of people, get those people onto its books. And the SASA contract gave Net1 this mass of people. The second wave was to sell those people financial products, loans, insurance, and airtime. So what's the problem? I've got a loan with a bank, and I benefit from it. I've got insurance. I've bought airtime through my bank. That's a service that I've paid for with my bank. But I'm not a social grant beneficiary. My social circumstances are highly privileged by comparison, and the power that I have to hold my bank to account when things go wrong is quite substantial. There are rules and regulations that protect me, and my bank has a big brand that it aims to protect. I have airtime, I have a phone, I have internet. I know how to find out what these rules are, and I can give my bank a hard time when it goes wrong, and it responds in kind. Even so, I feel that deep sense of panic when I see money draining from my account that I didn't expect to drain from it, or when I lose my card and I can't access my money, or if I'm in some sort of financial situation and I phone the bank and I get sent from pillar to post and I can't get recourse. And that's in my, frankly, very powerful position. So those rules that are supposed to make sure that the banks don't abuse people, to make sure that Net1 doesn't abuse people, my investigations when I was reporting on this suggested quite strongly that Net1 was flouting those rules. Its people weren't licensed, its organizations weren't properly licensed. I pretended to be a beneficiary looking for recourse from Cash Paymaster Services, and I phoned the helpline and I got sent around from pillar to post, and it was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous situation. I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to actually collect that evidence. I just wanted to see for myself, but I didn't need to do it because of everything that Avashni Naidu has just explained to us, the stories that Margrace and other grant beneficiaries have told us about their harrowing experiences, about their meager grants disappearing from their accounts and them not knowing how to fix the problem, and people having to travel at great distance, at great relative expense, massive expense, to try and find recourse. And yeah, that's how people are getting harmed when private interest is put before the public interest. To close, I don't know how to close my thoughts on this. I've lost touch with the story, and I'm looking forward to the next speaker, Rachel, who will give us a sense of the way forward. I'd like to know if our social grant system is safe and stable today, and if grants are being paid without interruption, and if those grants are safe in people's hands, and if people have recourse available to them when they are abused. I'd like to know if other companies are preparing to abuse the same system. I hope not. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. You certainly reminded us that there's still a great deal of work ahead of us, and that the work is not just on one front, but many, many fronts to protect our citizens, particularly from those who have a great deal of power and financial backing behind them. Our next speaker is Advocate Gina Snemer, and she's going to talk to us about the work campaign and the strategic litigation. Welcome, Gina, and you have the floor. You have a few minutes. I will just switch on my camera when you need to wrap up, but good luck.
Thank you, Yul. So we all are aware that the Constitution protects the rights to social security of everyone in need in South Africa. But this hasn't always happened in practice, as the previous speakers have already demonstrated and everyone is well aware. And as a result of this, the Black Sash was involved in litigation between 2013 to 2019 to protect this rights to the mere gross social grants that beneficiaries do receive, such as they are. And the litigation that Black Sash was in was intended as part of this broader advocacy strategy through the Hands Off Our Grants campaign. It was never intended to be litigation for its own sake. Civil society and social justice organizations enter into litigation normally as a matter of last resort when other avenues don't bear fruit. It's the twofold to the reasons for this. Firstly, that litigation can come with the risk of tremendous cost orders against the parties litigating, but also because it takes a while for matters to work their way through the courts, and ultimately the outcomes from court litigation may not necessarily address the broad spectrum of needs that must be met through policy changes, political changes, and changes of the players involved. When the Black Sash engaged in the litigation that I'm going to talk to during the periods 2013 to 2019 and onwards, Black Sash has played different roles in the litigation. In some instances, it intervened as an amicus curiae or friend of the court. In others, it initiated the litigation itself, where it was necessary to do so on an urgent basis. In some of the cases, Black Sash was litigating against the state, against the minister, against the Department of Social Development, to ensure that the integrity of the social grant system was actually upheld so that beneficiaries could indeed receive their social grants. And in other matters, Black Sash participated in litigation where it supported the role of the Minister and the Department of Social Development, certainly in its cleanup campaign and its amendments to various regulations against private companies to protect grant beneficiaries from the exploitation by the private companies. And so the Black Sash's role through this litigation took on many different facets and turns, both through being an amicus, through approaching the court directly, and both in who it sought targeted relief from, whether it was the state or whether it was from the private companies. And in this litigating role that the Black Sash took on, it wasn't in a normal sense of being a client that instructed attorneys. Black Sash worked really closely in the litigation with one of its partners, Center for Applied Legal Studies at the University of Witwatersrand, where CALS supported Black Sash's litigation approach while acting as its representatives on record, because it also aligned with CALS's work in its rule of law and business and human rights programs. And so there was a partnership relationship to this litigation that was part of the Black Sash's overall broad strategy to protect grant beneficiaries. The litigation that Black Sash was involved in can be divided into two broad categories. One was focused on ensuring that grant beneficiaries actually received their social grants, and the other was aimed at protecting the cleanup processes that the state had introduced to try and protect beneficiaries from these deductions that were happening on their SASSA cards and on their EPE cards. And the starting point really for all of this litigation would have been the first all pay case back in 2012 after the initial award of the payment system to CPS under Net 1. At the time that the new payment system was awarded to CPS, there had been different companies that had been contracted by the states to pay social grants through a group of different companies in different provinces. And it was intended that this would all fall under the auspices of one company, and CPS won this tender. Notwithstanding that the SASSA Act and the Social Assistance Act had always intended that this be an in-house function that should be provided by the state, but it was unable to do so, and it put this out on tender. Since its inception, this tender was mired in controversy, and we're all aware that the outcome of the All Pay 1 and 2 decisions was that this tender was declared unlawful. However, it was not set aside, it was suspended, because the Constitutional Court held that if it was set aside, there would be a crisis where there would be no payments of social grants. And therefore, orders were made where the court exercised then too its extraordinary oversight role and set in place a structural interdict where the minister and SASSA had to report to the Constitutional Court on what steps it was taking to ensure that it could take over in-house the payment of social grants or appoint another service provider. Black Sash intervened as an amicus in this matter too, especially where it became apparent that SASSA and the minister were not taking necessary steps to ensure that another service provider could be appointed in time. However, during or around 2015, the minister and SASSA did report to the Constitutional Court that they would be in a position to take over payments in-house themselves by the deadline at the end of March 2017. As we know, however, this was not the case. It was widely reported on in the media. There were numerous parliamentary questions around this, and as late as January 2017, it was widely recognized that SASSA and the department was in absolutely no state to take over the payment function themselves of social grants, and that there was no other service provider in place to do so. Concerned about the crisis that would ensue for millions and millions of grant beneficiaries, Black Sash, in probably one of its most important legal interventions, took the extraordinary step of approaching the Constitutional Court on a direct access basis and urgently seeking the court's oversight to reinstate its role and to ensure that payments would be made to grant beneficiaries from April 2017, and that if absolutely necessary, this would even include the extension of the CPS contract. One of the many extraordinary outcomes of this tranche of litigation was that the court has recognized that CPS, even though it was a private company, was stepping into the role of government in being a payment service provider, and therefore it attracted constitutional obligations of its own. So apart from in normal circumstances where it is based in contract that a private company would have been bound to make the social grant payments, the court compelled CPS to continue with payment of social grants after the expiry of the contract because of the constitutional role that it had stepped into for the provision of these services. And apart from the contract that had existed, the court compelled this extension and compelled CPS to continue with these payments. It not only made this order, it also held in this and its previous decisions that while CPS was not obliged to not turn any was not obliged to do this at its own cost, it was not permissible to benefit from this extended invalid contract. And CPS was ordered to account for when it started turning a profit and what profit it had made. It is extraordinary that the court compelled CPS to report on this. As things presently stand, CPS has been ordered to file more audit statements because the ones it has filed have been inadequate. And there is litigation that is ensuing, being led by Freedom Under the Law, which had intervened in this matter of Black Sashes, to account properly for the profits that it has garnered, and in due course may well seek an order from the court that CPS be ordered to pay back any undue profits. This is one of the extraordinary outcomes of this litigation. Another is that, as has been well publicized, it was one of the first times in which a court ordered a cabinet minister to pay costs in her personal capacity because of her manner of litigation and because of the actual substance of the matter. We know that the affidavits that were filed at court were challenged. We know that Minister Bathabile Dlamini was joined in her personal capacity because the court was not satisfied with the information she provided on affidavit. And we also know that because of this dispute that had been created, the Constitutional Court also went through the exceptional process of establishing what is called a Section 38 inquiry, which was another hearing heard between retired Justice Mr. Ngwepe, where Minister Dlamini was obliged to account for at what stage she had known a private service provider was not at what stage Minister Dlamini had known that another company was not going to be put in place to pay social grants, why she had not informed the court about the debacle around the work streams that she had appointed that were directly reporting to her and seemed to have thwarted the whole process for SASSA to take payments in-house, and why she had not put this information properly before the court. This also resulted ultimately in the findings and recommendations from the Section 38 inquiry that the outcome had to be placed before the National Prosecuting Authority, which we also know has recently resulted in Minister Dlamini being convicted for perjury because of her misrepresentations on affidavit to the court and through the Section 38 inquiry. This has also been a most extraordinary outcome to this litigation saga and to this crisis around payments that started in 2017. Excuse me. And has been a successful outcome that hadn't even been intended when Black Sash started this particular tranche of litigation, in showing just how seriously the Constitutional Court had taken both the social grants crisis, but also the manner in which government was responsible for ensuring social grant beneficiaries received their payments and in holding governments to account. One of the other outcomes of this litigation, which has been beneficial and which I think persists, is that despite South Africa as a welfare state being contested politically, and despite a lot of criticism from many quarters around the high cost to the fiscus of providing social security to South Africans, this litigation, the publicity around it, the social grants crisis from 2017 onwards, garnered so much public interest and support that it shifted the conversation to a recognition of how very important it is that so many South Africans do receive social grants and that they're able to receive them through a functioning process that works from government while upholding the rule of law in this process. And that has been quite an incredible win to Black Sash's litigation in this regard. The other main theme to the litigation, Hugh, can you give me a time indication?
Now, how many minutes do you need? That's fine. Just continue.
Okay.
That's fine.
Let's say 3 to
No,
5.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. The other main tranche to the Black Sash's litigation was around protecting grant beneficiaries from the depletion of their grants. This also reached such a state of crisis through Black Sash's advocacy, through the stellar work of journalists such as Craig that spoke before me in exposing the extent and the heinousness of the deductions and the manner in which they were being taken off unsuspecting grant beneficiaries. And eventually, the Department of Social Development and the Minister slowly woke up to this and started what they called a cleanup process, part of which was to amend regulations, to instruct CPS and other to instruct CPS that social grants could not be used for the payment of funeral policies, and also that child support grants could not be used for payment of funeral policies, and period, that there shouldn't be any deductions from child support grants. This resulted in a flurry of litigation from a number of companies. Two of the matters, which were brought, one by Lion of Africa and one by Channel Life, sought to interdict SASSA and the Minister's cleanup process. The short outcome of Black Sash's intervention as an amicus in both of these matters, and ultimately, once the regulations were passed amending the system, is that we're now in a position where child support grants cannot be used for any funeral policy deductions, and child support grants can also not be used for any other kind of deductions. And this was also an incredible victory for Black Sash through its role as an amicus, through the steps that it took to engage experts, actuarial experts, to seek to place evidence before the court on how there was absolutely no value to children in having these deductions, but also in having funeral policies registered against their child support grants. One of the other more difficult matters that Black Sash was involved in was in the challenge to the regulations that was brought by Net1 and a slew of other companies around the interpretation of the new regulations that were passed. And because the new regulations were an attempt to ring fence the SASSA and EPE cards from any kind of debit order deductions. Black Sash intervened in this litigation in support of SASSA and the Minister, and it also assisted 6 individual grant beneficiaries who intervened in this matter. So Black Sash and these individual grant recipients were co-respondents with SASSA and the Minister in defending the Minister's interpretation of the new regulations for these accounts to be ring-fenced. Ultimately, neither the High Court nor the Supreme Court of Appeal agreed with SASSA and with Black Sash's interpretation of the new regulations, although the Supreme Court of Appeal, based on Black Sash's intervention, did recognize that there was a serious problem here. But ultimately, the Supreme Court of Appeal found this litigation had been rendered moot because by this stage, it had already been established through the other litigation with the end of CPS's contract that the new contract was going to be handed to the post office, and that Treasury with the post office was able to, going forward, ring-fence grant beneficiaries' bank accounts. So the outcome in this regard was still successful. I'm going to leave it there and let's see if there's anything more that comes up to the questions. But just to conclude that the crisis around the payment of social grants and the crisis around the deductions from grant beneficiaries' grants could not have been fixed, alleviated, or improved such as it was without the extraordinary steps that Black Sash took in this commitment to the litigation that it engaged on during this period. And that overwhelmingly, as far as litigation can be, it was successful for Black Sash, and it was an extraordinary contribution, both in respect of the outcome for individual grant beneficiaries, but also for holding governments to account, holding private companies to account, and in ensuring the integrity of the grant system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gina. I was going to hate to cut you short because it's such an interesting talk that you gave us. It also showed that the court cannot always solve the problems, and that, you know, it takes institutions and civil society organizations to help them along. Our next speaker is going to be Rachel de Cruza. She is the Black Sash Executive Director, and she will really talk about, you know, where is Black Sash now and the way forward. Okay, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Can I ask you to give yourself a round of applause? Because from all those things, it's because of everyone's involvement in this room, directly, indirectly, tweeting, retweeting, reading, whatever you did. Can I ask you to give yourself a round of applause for the work that we've got until here? Yeah? Great. Okay, so I had this whole thing prepped, but I think what's useful here is to just have a conversation about where we are, what's happened. Craig, I think your questions were really so useful, because I think we were all in this space in different ways, different times. And then we all know the pandemic happened, and then everybody was convinced they were going to die. And so grants went, you know, the back of the thoughts. We were just trying to survive and try to look after our mental health. And then that also meant government also had an opportunity to rest, because suddenly there weren't cases going to court. There weren't all these things happening. And so I want to take us from this survival mode. Where did we go? What happened? And where are we now? I'm just going to cover 3 things, but I just want to start off with some of, I think Craig's question was meaningful for those that were involved in the space and then they left. Where are we standing now? So COVID happened. Everyone thought they were going to die. I thought I was going to die. I was panicked. And so we were all busy looking after ourselves. And then government decided, well, actually, with this pandemic and the impact it has on everyone, something needs to be done, because people closed, etc. Enters the Social Relief of Distress Grant. Okay, so I'll call it SRD for short. So they enter, or what you probably know more comfortably as the 350 grant, right? So the 350 grant comes into the picture. The idea being it needs to be some form of support for people while we're dealing with a pandemic, while we're trying to figure out, you know, what went where. What was interesting about the SRD grant was how fast government was able to bring it to fruition. How fast we were able to get it across the country. Now, mind you, all these years, the problem of delivery, the problem of getting things done was, oh, we don't have the infrastructure. But lo and behold, would you imagine that from, I think it was the second week of March when the pandemic hit, poof, come April, look at that. We can get money to people. So that was the first thing that happened. And then as we started with, you know, people getting this SRD grant, there were a myriad of implementation issues, as you can imagine. There were issues around, you know, how do I know how to apply? And if you, and when there was a rejection, how do I go around appealing? And there wasn't a mechanism to appeal. And there was, the biggest problem at the time with the grant, and in fact still remains a problem, is that there was this threshold of how much money you had to make in order to qualify for the grant. And I think at the time it was just under 600 Rand, 500 something. But the problem with that, right? It meant that you couldn't make money from anything else. If the total in your bank account reflected just under that 600 Rand amount, you didn't qualify. But now you and I know, if Auntie sends 100 Rand here, this one sends 100 there, and there. I sell something off the street for 200 Rand. Suddenly I'm disqualified. So those were already some of the issues we began dealing with at the time, right? The threshold issue. And then the biggest thing, in addition to that threshold issue, is that you'd make this application to get this SRD grant. And they would run your name through government databases. So whether it was UIF, whether it was SARS, whatever it be, they'd run your name to make sure you weren't hiding money, essentially. I mean, how much money could you hide? But anyway, that's not the point. The point is this thing would come up and see whether you qualified or not. But the fundamental problem with that system was that, as you'd expect, government systems were not up to date. So essentially, it would reflect what happened 5 years ago, and now my financial situation is completely different. And now half the people are now fighting around that issue, okay? And of course, a third issue then we started fighting about was about, well, what about non-citizens? COVID is impacting everyone. COVID is not discriminating. The financial issues are facing everyone. So how do we deal with this? So that was the other fight happening there, right? Then we had initial lockdown, then lockdown was extended, etc. And so the fight began on, I think initially there was a limited period for this. The fight started to be about, we need to extend the grant because COVID is not over. We all thought 2 weeks, we survived 2 weeks, and then we go back to our normal lives. That's not what happened. And so the grant needed to be extended. The grant got extended, etc. So that's what happened post the litigation that Gina was speaking about. That's the world we found ourselves in. And so Craig, one of the questions he also said, he asked, well, are grants safe? So currently we've taken on the fight to extend the grant, including that SRD grant, is extended until March next year. So the question is, now that we're no longer in the state of disaster, now that, you know, that urgency around that is not there, where are we? So essentially, January this year, and last year, January this year, two things happened. Black Sash engaged with the presidency around this issue of grant. And one of the biggest push was, just because you have this 350 grant in place does not mean that we do away with the bigger issues of basic income for people. Because I think that was the tendency means to be, well, we've got this in place, so we try to forget that. No. So as part of our engagement, we were saying two things. One, you make the SRD grant permanent, or at least as an interim measure, right? While we figure out how we're going to afford this, because it's always about the fiscus, can we afford it, implementation. So the argument was, we make the SRD grant an interim measure until we can all get to an agreement about this basic income grant for people who are 18 to 59 with little or no income, right? So one is that, and then that buys us time then with government, with the economist, everybody in the room to get to a place of agreeing of how a basic income grant gets legislated, right? And we said to the presidency, actually, we have proposals for you. You're saying, you and your ministers are saying we can't afford it. We're actually saying that this can be done. Have people in a room, set it up as an expert task force, a presidential task team, call it whatever you want to call it, but essentially bring the economists, bring the money people, bring the civil society people, put us in a room, the experts, and let us show you how this can be figured out. Because it's very easy to say we can't afford it, but when we look at how certain government expenditures are happening and wastage, no one's talking about that. We're showing you that if it can be streamed, researchers put people in, and let's see. If at the end of that, you say, you see, we really can't afford it, okay, fine. But what's the problem with listening? So that was the conversation that happened in January. The president went, fine, okay, we'll do this. We'll get, you know, people together to do this. And as any respectable politician, he said that to appease us, and then we're still waiting. But so essentially that's there. But in this process of getting, because part of the agreement was that in June, we would make a proposal to the presidency around how we make sure that basic income, when I say we, it's not Black Sash, it's everybody. Remember the ministers of finance, everybody, that whole team. Now it's the issue of getting that team together. So what has happened while we were waiting for that? This national state of disaster ended. It ended, and then the question became, but now what does this mean for the poor people? They said that they would now move the grant. So firstly, getting them to agree to keep the grant was a very big victory. despite the national state of disaster ending. But what required it was that it needed to now be absorbed into the Social Assistance Act, so the SASSA Act essentially, Social Security Act. And so it got absorbed, but as any respectable government that really sometimes shows that it doesn't care for its people, it came with amendments. What they did, number one, that we're currently facing, as remember I said it was just under 600 Rand? Well now, if you make 350 Rand during the month, you can no longer get the grant. So if somehow all your little income, all your little hustles is 350 Rand, you no longer qualify for the grant. So we've essentially gone to a place of deciding that this is the class of poor people and have now gone and decided for the poorest amongst the poor. But now there was no provision for what about all those other people who've been receiving this grant and now no longer qualify? What happened to them? Because it's not like the job market has bounced back and they can be absorbed in it. So they've just been left basically up there. The second thing is that one thing that has continued even before the book and during now was the issues around dignity when people go to collect the grants. We've seen over and over again, and I think Vashni, when she comes back at some stage, she'll tell you there are spaces in KZN where there's a long queue, as you would expect. You see them at the post office or SASSA or sometimes during the month, and not a single bathroom. And what are people forced to do? They cross the road and urinate or use the bathroom in the field, in front of everyone, the men, the women, it doesn't matter. So the issues of dignity still remain. The issue of just humane treatment as people are getting this grant remain. And part of the reason that remains is because this narrative that a grant is doing you, the recipient, a favor is there. That narrative needs to shift. A grant is not a favor. A grant is government's responsibility to look after its people. You are not doing anyone a favor, and I don't have to take it under any condition you give it. It is your responsibility to deliver it properly. So the third thing then that happened, so I said to you, they've extended it, but smaller threshold. There's no dignity in connecting it. And then 2 weeks ago, the South African Post Office, which you will know is one of the arms that SASSA uses in order to get people these grants, wakes up and lets us know that actually they are no longer processing grants. No explanation, no nix. I wake up at 6 o'clock. Hi, Ms. Fukasa, here's the statement we're going to release. Done. As of that day, they were no longer processing grants. Now you should ask yourself, don't think of here where there's 2 malls, 3 malls. You can think of the remotest remote areas where the access to the grant is only done through SAPO. Now you wake up and you no longer give them. What happens to those people? Because remember, those people are already struggling with getting transport to go to your offices, spend the whole day there, then get the grant and transport back. But now you just randomly decide, no notice, no nix, we're no longer paying. No consideration of the implications that has with people, right? And so they're no longer paying. They don't have updated databases. And then the question now remains, what have we done? Why are we going 5 steps backwards? Now, mind you, this is the interim measure. We're not even talking about the basic income support that should be put in place. And so the difficulties you'll see, so when you ask, are grants safe? No, they're not. We've actually gone backwards. Grants are not safe. The political will needle still hasn't shifted. And I think part of that problem is that we in this room and people who are committed to these things need to be part of the people that change the narrative. The narrative that grants are a handout and encourage laziness is a position that comes from privilege. Only if you're privileged, you have financial means, you can say that grants make you lazy. Because I can assure you that everyone, if given the opportunity, would want more than just a grant. I can assure that everyone, if given the opportunity, would want something of their own to be able to say that it's not the grants they're relying on. So to say that grants encourage laziness or unemployment is also, you actually haven't done your research, because in fact, research shows that grants stimulates informal economies. Okay, so we need to change that narrative and that messaging. We need to change that so that it becomes a responsibility on the government and not on the grant recipients, because that's the problem with this market, right? It's up to the recipient to move and advocate for themselves and push for these rights. Well, actually, no, that's government's job. And so the burden has to shift. So that's just in terms of where are we now. The way forward for Black Sash, and I'll cover just 3 points and we'll close. The way forward, as I said, we are at the top level talking through that. One, making sure the SRD grant is an interim measure, but two, making sure that basic income grant is legislated. And the fight around we can't afford it, we've given a way. Let's decide collectively if really we can't afford it. And so basically the ball is in the presidency's court on whether he's going to make this happen or not, because we've shown that it can be done. It's about whether you want to receive it or not. And so the second thing, in terms of where are we are going to, the way forward is we're going to continue to ensure that grant recipients are protected. And that's not just from the issues of indignity, like I've explained, I've described, but also they need to be protected from, as you would remember, Ivashni tried to allude to earlier and cover earlier, the issues of reckless lending. A lot of our work is going to go into that. And we've had meetings, Mr. Gabriels, we're happy you're here. But essentially the idea behind, it's not the grant recipient's responsibility to learn how to budget. It is government's responsibility to make sure that certain creditors cannot do certain things to grant recipients' monies. So the answer is not, well, tell them not to go to loan sharks. That's not the answer. The answer is that these big loan sharks or corporates or whatever they want to call themselves are legislatively protected against trying to exploit grant beneficiaries. So in that kind of work, we're doing a lot of the reckless lending work and the education around that. And also we are in conversation with the National Credit Regulator as well as DTI in terms of making sure that legislation is passed to make sure that people cannot exploit grant recipients and that money. We have, through our community-based monitoring group, understood that, in fact, people are using their grants as collateral. So I put my grant up because it is money that I know for sure is coming. And then I put that as collateral towards another grant. All right. So we're not a mommy. We're not advocating for becoming parents where we're saying to people, you can't go get a loan. But what we are saying is that the lenders need to be regulated to know what they can and cannot do with this grant. So that's part of the work that's happening. The third one is that we are now moving beyond just the conversation of grants. Because one thing we have established, it's no longer an issue of if we should have a basic income support, but rather it's an issue of we must and how do we do it, right? So we've gone past the maybes, like we just can't afford not to have one. And so now that we've moved past that, we are moving to a place of ensuring that human dignity requires us to push the government to do more than just have people beg and plead for a grant, that it is administered in a lackluster manner. It's time for government to fulfill its obligation to people in a more meaningful way. So going forward, Black Sash is going to be advocating for social protection floor. If I may introduce the concept of a social protection floor, it's basically the idea of a nationally defined set of social security guarantees that ensures a minimum standard of living for its people. So imagine it as this basket of rights, the minimum safety net each government has an obligation to give people in its territory. So one of the things we're thinking of as part of that right, of course, basic income forms part of that right, that net of safety, but also the issue of access to basic services. Because what we have now is someone receiving 350 Rand and half of it has gone to electricity, half of it to water, and then there you go. There's nothing else. And so this idea of access to basic services, because it can be done if those infrastructures, your ESCOMs, your council or whatever were properly administered, we could do this. So the idea of free access basic services, and as well as the rights that come to people as a result of climate change and all this. I can break down for you at some stage. I'll be in the room. I don't want to abuse my time, but essentially the idea that now the call is that government has to do more than just grants. Government has to ensure a certain minimum of safety for its people, and that is not a favor it's doing for us. That is an obligation it has to do. And so that's where we are. The fight, essentially, because that's what it is. It isn't a pleasant walk in the park. That's a fight. And it's now continuing. And so if you would like to support the work of Black Sash, there's different ways of doing it. There's again, by being here is supporting the work of Black Sash. By being able, Craig writing about it is the way we support the media exposure, etc. And so if you would like to support the work of Black Sash, please do get in touch on our website. There are different ways in which it can be done. And so we'll be able to be in touch with regards to that. So thank you so much. Derek, I don't want to exploit my time. Am I done?
Yeah, you did pretty well on time, but we will have to adjust. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Okay, great. So thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anne Crotty. I'm a journalist. I did follow the SASA saga for a few years. Unfortunately, I'm not a recipient or wasn't a recipient. So it was an amazing process. But I just wanted to ask on CPS. Now they've got new owners. Well, Net1 is now owned by, largely it's sort of controlled by Value Capital Partners. But I believe CPS has been put into liquidation. So where does that leave the claim against them? Could maybe Gina explain?
Sure. I think we'll take the questions and then we'll have them answered. So we'll take 4 and answer them at the same time. Sure. Number 2.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elroy Polis. I have the privilege of working for the Black Sash. Before, I now work for the Alternative Information and Development Center, AIDC. And it is imperative that our organizations must talk, because there's something that was not mentioned that is a big loophole to especially transnational corporations. In our analysis of the budget as AIDC, one of the things we picked up is that in terms of corporate taxation, the Minister Enoch Godongwana and government made it legal now to take up to 55% of a corporation's profits offshore and not be taxed on it. Now, I see the implications of that. So if EasyPay Everywhere, which is part of Net1, decides to do that, the government has, for whatever reason, made something that was, remember, colleagues, when we were, for those of you who were around early on, there's one word you couldn't say. And the word that we were warned not to say is illegal, right, Lynette? We couldn't say illegal. You could say unlawful, immoral, odious, but you couldn't say illegal. Now government is making something that was illegal more legal. And that must be fought, because we're going the other way. It is important not only to hold the presidency accountable, but to challenge the austerity, the alleged austerity that Minister Godongwana has imposed. He takes away from people. The real and nominal cuts are large, especially in the social wage, health, education, etc. But he funds large corporations to extract profits further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Nkosikhulule Nyembezi. I also had the privilege of working for Black Sash, and I just want to say congratulations to everyone for the work. Job well done, because what you are documenting is really encouraging for taking forward the struggle. And I think this link, this talk that the grants are not safe also can make us to think about more ways I am. Oh, thanks. Just in terms of what we see continuing, the confiscation of ID cards, this thing about micro lenders, we're talking about the sharks. Now, when we say what is the way forward, and to keep the work linked in terms of the grant recipients, but just also in terms of the debt and credit, insofar as the loan sharks continue to scavenge on people, particularly when we link it to this issue of access to information, the data that government keeps. I mean, we know this squabble with the .gov and how the use of private personal information is being harvested to be able to extract information and sell things to people. So I think if we can continue to make that circle bigger, we will be able to hit the bed with two birds with one stone, in terms of looking at the social grants and the vulnerable groups, but also in terms of those middle class or somewhat privileged people who are also threatened increasingly by the issues of loan sharks, the misuse of information, and so on, in the hope that we can make milestones in the years to come. Thanks.
So much. I'm going to hand over to the panel to answer the questions, but maybe while I still have the floor to deal around the issue of harvesting of grant beneficiaries' information. What was the organization? No, the one we had the thing with. Yes, so we've been with Open Secrets. We've been working with Open Secrets around this issue, particularly of GovChat data. And you'll see, like now the SRD grants, the new system is that you have to enter your parents' details, their grandparents, or things that realistically you don't have. I'm a 70-year-old. Please explain to me how I know my parents' details, etc. And so the question around data, GovChat being a good example, how is a whole machine like that working for free? It receives zero compensation for what it does. You've got to ask yourself, oh, there is compensation, but in what form? Because there's no way you can tell me a big machine like that runs for zero money. It doesn't get paid for nothing, you know? So I'm just going to hand over to some panelists. Gina, I know the first question was for you. I don't know if you'd like to go first, or I can hand over to people here. Gina, just the question around CPS.
Happy to respond. Thanks, Anne, for your question. So yes, that's my understanding as well, that CPS is in liquidation. And I mean, it's arguable whether or not that was all intentional to get around whatever it may at some point be required to repay. There was also other litigation brought by Corruption Watch around additional tender payments that were made to it that ultimately the court found that they must repay. I think it was in the amount of 370 odd million, if you recall that. I'm not actually up to speed on where freedom under the law is currently with that litigation. I'm not involved in it, but I also importantly don't want to prejudge the outcome of what a court may decide in that litigation. It might be that because CPS is in litigation, any order that is made against CPS ultimately would just be a concurrent claim against the liquidators. That could be the consequence in practical terms if the court were to make any order that CPS must repay any money. That would still also be preempting the outcome, though, because that is still argument that will have to be advanced by freedom under the law. Because even though during the first all-pay decisions, which said that CPS shouldn't be profiting from its unlawful contract and that from its unlawful and invalid contract, and that's why it needs to report to the court on when it turned a profit and what that profit was. Later in the Black Sash litigation from 2017 onwards, the Constitutional Court seems to have backtracked on having made that statement that CPS shouldn't be able to derive any any profit. And so it's not a foregone conclusion that a court would ultimately order that any amount had to be repaid. But what I still think remains significant about this is that CPS has been is being compelled to file proper audited statements, because the initial ones that it filed at the conclusion of the initial 5-year contract which were prepared by KPMG at the time, were wholly inadequate. They didn't give sufficient information at all, and Black Sash made the arguments at the time as well that it was misleading, because Black Sash had sought the assistance from an economist from the Alternative Information Development Center, AIDC, to do an analysis of what CPS had put before the court, and also found that it was wholly inadequate. And so just as a first step, I think it is incredibly significant that CPS has been compelled to file proper audited statements. But as far as my understanding is from that litigation that Freedom Run the Law is proceeding with, it's still quite early days.
Lynette?
Thank you. I want to take Nyembezi's question about the protection of confidential data. In both the All Pay case and the Black Sash cases, the court ruled that the confidential data of grant beneficiaries must be protected because the mechanisms were wholly inadequate throughout the process. But to try and access and stop information from a private company's collection was a challenge. And so the question around the contract being terminated became all the more urgent, so that they don't have access to new beneficiaries and their information. In the transition from CPS to SAPO, that mechanism of a private entity or even another state entity collecting, say, for example, biometric data, was moved to the Department of Home Affairs. So in other words, if you do need to verify somebody's ID or whatever, you can do it online via that mechanism who will hold it and who legitimately holds it, rather than all sorts of private mechanisms to collect the data. But the data remains at risk, and one do need to be vigilant because there are GovChat and other entities that enter the system or who designs the system that one just needs to have a monitoring lens on that. But I think also what helped to protect some of the or the deductions, protect accounts from the deductions, was the creation of the SAPO ring fence bank account, which did not allow for these deductions to actually take place. And with the trouble with SAPO, the decrease in the number of post offices, the closing of post offices, etc., that account may be at risk. And the fact that SASSA is not issuing it to any new beneficiaries or recipients, encouraging them to go to the open market to then bring those bank accounts back into the system. So they are, and some of these banks, particularly the low-end bank accounts, they call it the 5 Rand numbers. Those 5 Rand numbers come with huge security risk. People can draw your money from elsewhere. And I followed up with, on a couple of cases where that has happened. It's onerous to follow them up. You have to go to police stations, etc., prove that it wasn't you, etc., etc. So the risk of people's money, as Craig said, are still there. And so how do one protect these mechanisms that are in place and strengthen them? I mean, on the SAPO account, we had a lot of fraud issues, but through the recourse mechanism, people were refunded to quite a big sum in the millions. And so going forward with the SRD grant, I think there are huge access issues. And the issues is about, you need a computer to register for the grant. if you do not have a computer or a cell phone or data or whatever, you get blocked right from there. You can't go into the SASSA offices to open. And this has got huge implications for, and I mean, I've been assisting people to just get the second grant. Those questions, if they answered it the wrong way, you can't access, you can't go further. They don't allow you to submit. And so those are challenges that we need to, the Black Sash and others need to continue to work on, so that this access to social protection is protected in some or other way. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lynette. And then Alroy, of course, I note your comment that we should speak. There's a lot there. Derek, do you want to take us maybe through some questions online before I open a second round here?
I haven't seen any questions in the chat.
Okay,
Maybe
sure.
I can't. I also don't see any hands, but some people can help me with that.
Sure, maybe then can I ask in the room? Are there further
Let's
questions?
go another round in the room, yes.
Okay, so 1, 2.
Thank you. My name is Colleen Ryan, and I was at Black Sash at the time of the campaign, so that's who I am. I just want to say that presently I'm working for the Department of Social Development, and we are experiencing a whole lot of queries around the grants. So naturally, it's almost instinctive for me to go and find out. So the SRD grant is becoming a really big problem in that people are not even able to access this, not even apply, but once they've got the grant, they're not able to get it. So it's becoming, let me just think of an example. The biometrics, they've got a new system where they've tried to introduce SASSA biometrics so that people can get the grant and there's less fraud. But the system itself is not working. So every second day it's down. Now that's a problem. And when I go to the office and I ask them to explain it to me, then they say, no, we got a tender to get these biometrics in place. I just hear the word tender and then I'm really, really alarmed. So I do think that if there's anything that Black Sash does start looking at, is that biometrics tender system and who's got it and why is this thing not working? Because people are really not getting this money. I mean, I work quite a lot in the Karoo as well. And there people stand in the queue from 4 o'clock in the morning and at 2 o'clock SASSA will say, sorry, we can't help you. The queues are so long, but the system is down. So you really need to look into that systems. And I just want to say that there are still queries around deductions. I come from Googs last week. Emerald Life, they're busy again in Guguletu. So I'm starting to work on that as well now. So just to let you know.
Sure, thank you. And then maybe we can put you in touch with some of our regional heads. I know Ivasha and Tandwe particularly, there's been red flags. Around Emerald Life.
Yeah, but sorry, just before, not only Emerald Life, but SASSA itself. SASSA is becoming really challenging to even engage. And there's one woman in the SASSA office at Golden Acre that's in charge of all the SRDs, one woman. So SASSA in itself is a problem. DSD, because I work for a minister, we used to have meetings quarterly with SASSA. Those meetings have now stopped there. So there's a problem in SASSA and it's worth investigating.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right here in the front.
Thank you. Good day, everybody. My name is Kule Kilibanzi and I am from the Observatory Informal Settlement. I cannot unfortunately claim to have worked for Black Sash or with Black Sash, but what I do know about Black Sash, I mean, I know this since I was a kid. Actually, I remember them wearing the sashes, at political, what they call them, in courts, basically. And yeah, I mean, it's always good to know that they've always been on the right side of the law of history. I heard the lady talk about a grant. Personally, me, I'm all for a basic income, a universal basic income that would incorporate everybody. I've been trying to get a hold of this SASSA grant, and unfortunately, for some reason, I'm unable to get it. For me, I just had a once-off windfall from them. I had to actually call Johannesburg. I tried all the offices, national ones. I had to call Johannesburg, and I got it just for one month. and I think like 1,300 or something. And that was the last time I got from it. And I've given up. I'm not even trying to do it. But I mean, there are a lot of people who need this. And I would like to believe I won't call myself illiterate. I'm relatively computer literate. But if I can struggle with that, I can only imagine what other people go through.
Absolutely, absolutely. And your feedback is so important, right? Because when this new system came up, we in the office tried, us with access to computers and data and all of that. And it was hell of a mission. So if only us, let alone other people. And so I note your struggle. I mean, we hear every day. Our Western Cape regional head is here, as well as Abby and the others. They can put you in touch with our helpline to see how maybe we can troubleshoot some of those problems you might be facing. So thank you for that. Sure.
For me, just a comment. My name is Seth Lydy. I'm the SCATS Programs Director. Like this gentleman, missed the privilege to work with Black Sash. Yeah. We've worked with Black Sash on many projects, and I really must congratulate them for this good work that they've done. And I'm really impressed that from the beginning up till now, you guys have stayed on this course to fight this battle. And I like the way that you study to fight. And we can assure you of our support and partnership in making sure that the poorest of the poor actually get helped and protected against this loan shark. The second thing that I want to also appeal for is, there's been a campaign that we mustn't have bottle stores and shop-ins opening next to schools. I think the next campaign is we must stop loan sharks opening offices next to pay points. I've seen it in Pampirstad. I've seen it wherever we go. They are very strategic now because we're dealing with them on an electronic level. They come at the level at which where our people are, which is access, and they open these little offices, little desks, so that as soon as the person gets their grant, the guy is just next door. And then, so if we can also engage that campaign to say, government must legislate that loan sharks must never, ever have access to the poorest of the poor. The last thing that I'm thinking about it now is, I think it's about time that access to data and connectivity becomes a basic human right, especially for the poorest of the poor. I mean, Lynette just mentioned a few minutes ago that how can I apply online if I can't even connect? I mean, from SCAT's side, we've supported our partner organizations with laptops and modems and smartphones, etc. But the issue is they are unable to gain access to simple connectivity, especially in the poorest of the poor. But yeah, from me, congratulations, guys. Well done. And I think you guys deserve a round of applause.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you. And while we get to Angie, the issue around connectivity is true, because there's this conversation around, we're digitizing grant, we're moving to the digitization, etc. And our position as Black Sash, we're not against digitization. But what we're saying is digitization has to be done in a way that we can advise on how it's done, because we're on the ground, we know what's realistic. So if your plan for digitization firstly includes the use of a smartphone, you're already lost, because they get data and they say, well, 80% of people have phones. Yes, but you didn't differentiate. Is it a smartphone? Is it just a phone? Because that's two different things. Second thing, you can pump internet and connectivity all you want, but if I have a phone and I've got data, but if I'm not digitally literate, it doesn't matter. Like, you can give me all the computers in the world. If I'm not able to do that, I'm not able to do that. So essentially, yes, we're going there, but we need to go there in a way that is meaningful and helpful for our people. And that might mean taking longer than normal. Yeah. Angie.
I just thought I'd tell a little story. We started writing, well, Lynette had the idea for the book, I think it was end of 2019. And then we sort of began, and then COVID hit. And then I think we were all at home and we started writing again. And it was a mammoth task. Lynette doesn't keep everything electronic, by the way. She's very attached to numerous boxes that my ginger cat, George, really protected very well. But it was when this COVID grant was announced, and I think it was May, I woke up and my WhatsApp had gone crazy. SMS, I had missed calls, and I didn't really understand what was going on. And I started reading them, and it was essentially government had announced like you could get a COVID grant. And when people tried to, it was that initial start, so all its systems went down. And I had people sending me bank details, sending me their IDs. Yeah. And eventually, you know, eventually my husband took my phone away from me because it was just horrible, because a number of the calls, you know, you can just hear the desperation in people's voices. And I remember there was one Gogo, and I just, you know, I don't know, she just really spoke to me. So I actually said, look, I'll send you some money, because she just needed food. They couldn't get transport, and I did. And she actually sent me, she got her son or a grandson to send me the photo of the grocery slip, just to prove that she wasn't taking from me. And I think, Rachel, what you said was just so important. Like, we've got to just stop seeing people who on a social grant as just takers. They're not. I mean, they're sucking up a lot of pride to actually ask for help. And I think it's really important that that narrative changes, you know. And I think that was when Lynette and I, because I mean, all of us at Black Sash at that time, all our phones were ringing off the hook. And, you know, grant beneficiaries would literally, they got my number from the bottom of a press release. So they were on the internet, they were that desperate. They were spending more money than they were going to get from the 350 grant just to access it. You know, and I think that's when Lynette and I decided, like, we really wanted to put an emphasis in the book on the social, on the beneficiaries, on their story, you know, and has always been very pivotal throughout the campaign. And I think, you know, like Lynette said, what was very powerful is when Ma Grace got to actually speak to Batabili Dlamini. And Batabili, because I mean, Batabili at that first meeting asked for her own translator to come into the meeting, because she didn't trust Black Sash's translator, you know. And I think, you know, Ma Grace, I think she did eventually, you know, even the minister said she had to be repaid, and it still took months and whatever. But there were a number of times where people just, you know, they got to speak their truth to power. And that was very powerful, you know, bridging that gap from you down here, but, you know, we created this bridge to up there. And I think that was very impactful in the campaign.
In fact, it was so impactful, Lynette, that every time I want to meet with them, they tell me not to bring an entourage, to come on my own. So, yeah. Can we do, I think lunch is served, our snacks are outside. So can we do 1 or 2 more questions, and then we're going to start aiming towards wrapping up? No, I know. Are there, yes, sorry, there's a question at the back. I think we still have time for a couple of more questions. And then here in the front.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
My one is just a concern regarding the technology that we'll need to use when they apply for a grant. Recently in May, on the 3rd of May 2022, we noticed that from our community partner gave us a price that for instance, the internet cafes in the community in Khayelitsha specifically, that charges people, if you want to apply for a child support grant, you'll be charged 100 rand. And then if you've got, if it's 100 for a child support grant in old age, and also for the SRD grant, it's 60 rands. So I have a picture of a person sitting down there, trying to apply for a grant that doesn't have even a cent, but now you cannot even access it because you're using a Tilili. So it's a great concern for our citizens out there, and I'm not sure when this will end. That's my concern I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Sure. We'll just take in the front, and then we'll read a question on the group. Koliwe, could you just get the question ready for me?
Hi, good day. I'm Jainab Urendal, community partner of the Black Sash Delft. It's just a concern for us in the community. Speaking about smartphones and the tingling phones, people are actually, say for example, me and Aisha, I have a smartphone, Aisha doesn't have. So the big challenge is Aisha needs the 350 grant, but because I'm doing it for her, so all the information will go on my phone. I will even get the SMS to say my grant date is grant date is that day and that day. So I will charge her now. I want the 50 rand when the grant comes through. That is how our own people is exploiting each other in the community. And that is honestly not fair. So I would like recommend, if you can maybe consider it, that if you can have help desk, like as in for free central points in the communities where people can go, trustable people, because the Poppy Act, I don't even know why is that been exposed to the people, because no one's actually protecting anyone's privacy. So exploiting of our own poorest of the poorest by charging and having all her details on my phone just because she doesn't understand, she don't have airtime, she have nothing, and she have a tingling phone. So that is my great concern. Thank you.
I love that, a tingling phone. You raise such a valid point. I just, and while the panel gets maybe together, I just want to read, sorry, Koliwe, it disappeared. I wanted to read the question.
Rachel, there's a, Rachel, Derek, yeah. There's a question on the chat. Can we just give Zara Trafford a chance? Zara.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Zara.
Great. I was just wondering, I know one of the people in the room stood and said that as a representative from DSD, they were struggling to interact with SASSA. I'm wondering, my understanding is that SASSA is thoroughly mandated by DSD. SASSA only exists under the auspices of DSD, as far as I understand it from the legal position. So I'm wondering why there's no sort of accountability measure in place to hold SASSA accountable. I may be missing stuff. I'd just love to know a little tiny bit more about that from the representative.
Thank you. We'll get back to you. Over to you, Rachel.
Maybe Kalina must ask you. She, but again, look, the sense I've gotten dealing in that space, dealing with the heads of that space, is essentially that they see themselves as a unit. They are a unit, and we're on the other side. So you'll meet with head of DSD, head of SASSA, or SAPO as well. They are coming as a unit to the meeting, and then it's the rest of you. So I think those lines blur those accountability lines you're talking about, Zara, because now it's suddenly it's a team and not actually you're an implementing arm of this responsibility and we should hold you to account. And I think that's the big problem, the mentality that they speak as government, even though the relationships aren't exactly like that. Colleen?
Hello, Zara. I think I'll also just help to answer that question for you, because national DSD and then there's SASSA, which is a separate entity. So in every province, SASSA has their own office, but DSD as an office, and I work in the Western Cape. So the Western Cape office of DSD, SASSA office is a completely separate entity. So while we tried to have, and we started a really nice partnership with SASSA, we were meeting them once a quarter. So we tried to share what we're experiencing and for them to share their challenges. And that has just broken down. But I mean, we're completely separate entities in the province. Thank you. I hope that helps you as well.
Sure.
Zara, maybe I can give you just a little bit more insight. In the book, we've got a chapter on Parliament, and it really, if you read that chapter, you really kind of get an insight into how government currently operates, still does. And it's almost, the Parliament has oversight of all government departments and all entities. And it was just mind-boggling that MPs time and time again were asking, where's this plan? Where's this plan to hand over? Where's every, I mean, it literally went on for years. And at the end of the book, I mean, the end of this chapter, Lynette and I just sort of came to the conclusion that although Parliament has this power, this oversight role, it has to function, it has no technical capability, it has no resources, practical ways of if say SASSA commits to sending a report, that they do it. It just goes on and on and on. So, and I think you also see there is a disconnect between a government department and an entity. There's no, the IT systems aren't linked. And you can see this throughout government. I mean, you know, I did some with the compensation fund. There's another example of an IT system that just is completely dysfunctional. So although you have this legislation that DSD has a mandate over SASSA, the practical part of actually trying to enforce that role, there just isn't mechanisms there.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the key difficulty, right? So if we have that at corporate level, for lack of a better word, at partner to partner, company to company, let alone for the little person on the ground. Lorenzo, I note your question around where can we buy the book. Shanice, could you just put the slide up in terms of where we can get the book? And if I'm not mistaken, there's a salesperson outside, correct, Shanice? Yes, with the book available. Derek, may I proceed?
Please, I think it's best if you proceed.
Okay,
Thank you so
sure.
much.
So thank you for taking the time to be here today. And I think one thing that is clear, all your comments and calls to action, we're there. Currently in the immediate now, what we're busy with is we're going to challenge these SRD regulations in court. Some of the difficulties are highlighted are things we've tried to come to talk around the table with government, but clearly it's going nowhere. And now we've been left with no option but to be able to go and litigate these matters in order to get some form of outcome. So thank you for that. I'd just like to do some thank yous and acknowledgements. Hi. Okay, and why is this back to front? Tifu, can I get your question in the meantime? Okay, it's fine. The panelists are still here, so we can answer that afterwards. So as I said, our work continues. We've got a lot of work to do, not just as Black Sash, but as the community together, the community of people that are here. All I can ask is to ensure that we work together hand in hand, whatever way we can in our respective spaces, and also the ability to be able to get things done. So I'd like to say a heartfelt thanks to all the recipients who stepped forward to take up unauthorized fraudulent deductions from their social grant, because it's only by their speaking up that we're here today. If they hadn't had the courage, and I think you'll know that Craig highlighted that already in his position, it's hard, but let alone for someone who feels relatively small to the system, but to have the courage to take it up, it's why we're here today. So we thank particularly Margrace, Makwasi, Sipo Bani, Doreen and Jacob, as well as Jacob Fontaine from Series for really just starting this process for us. We'd like to thank our community partners, Community Advice Officers of South Africa, the Social Change Assistance Trust, and as well as the different independent advice officers. We'd like to thank Tulani Ndlovu, Patricia DeLanga, Joyce Muller, Marietta Hartenberg, Naomi Betana, and Emerentia Goliath from the different advice officers, to just thank them for their contribution as part of this. As Black Sash, we remain indebted to the David and Elaine Potter Foundation, as well as the Frank Robb Charitable Trust for the seed funding to write this manuscript. We acknowledge the financial contribution to the Hands of Our Grants campaign by the Wraith Foundation, as well as BROT, well, we call it Bread for the World, the Claude Leon Foundation, the Elmer Foundation, as well as the Social Justice Initiative. So thank you for that funding. It's only through your funding, donations, and support that we can get to do this kind of work. Our strategic partnerships are some things we really appreciate. So Center for Applied Legal Studies, CULS, we're grateful for the support during the litigation process, and even now the relationship that continue. We're particularly grateful to the former director, Bonita Mayersfield, advocate Nomonde Nyembe, Wandi Sapama, Akona Mflo, Kuresha Patel, for their contribution to the various legal cases. Also, we'd like to say special thanks to our legal counsel during the process of the book, Jeff Badlander, who's the senior counsel, the lead counsel, as well as Advocate Gina Sneyman, who was here today. Gina, thank you for attending, as well as Advocate Ngwenya for representing us so well in court during the cases we've covered in the book. We'd also like to particularly acknowledge the dedication, perseverance, and activisms of the Black Sash staff throughout this multifaceted campaign. Particular mention is necessary for the offices of the region, for the heads of the regional offices. The regional offices in Black Sash really spearheaded a lot of this work. And so I'd like to say particularly thank you to Tandiwe Zulu, who's the head of the Gauteng region. Under her leadership, the KZN region under the leadership of Vivashni Naidu, and Eastern Cape under the leadership of Alexa Lane, as well as the Western Cape, who are no longer people who are running the Western Cape, who are no longer with the SASH. Elroy, particularly mentioned to you, Colleen Ryan as well, Esley Philander, as well as the head of the troops at the time, Lynette. Lynette, thank you so much. We'd like to particularly thank as well our former and current trustees, and Mary Burton particularly, our patron, for your contribution to the book. Di Oliver, I note that she's just left. Yeah, and so just her. Okay, sure, thank you. So not a problem. So thank you, Di. I also like to, so, you know, I used to roll my eyes at the long thank yous, but actually this is important. The research and writing of this book was done by a collective, right? And so I'm going to list them, but it's in alphabetical order. It's not of order of importance, just purely alphabetical. So thank you for your contributions. Colleen and Crawford Cousins, Robin Foley, Moria Levy, Lynette Mott, also the book project manager, Angie Richardson, Esley Philander, and Natasha Valley. We want to particularly acknowledge the contribution of journalists, including Anne Crotty, Craig McCune, Barbara October from Roundup, Marion Tam of the Daily Maverick. We acknowledge the conversations with advocate Gina Sneyman, as well as Elroy, that shaped our thinking in drafting this book. And thank you, Moria Levy, for the compilation and editing of the manuscript, as well as engaging with the publisher. The HSRC press, especially Jeremy Wittman, Makwena Chipu, Samantha Michelle, Charlotte Imani, Ntuzi Kwane, and for the partnership, encouragement, and support in order to convert this manuscript we had into the book that we have today. And then last but not least, I'd like to thank the team that put this together. Ever since we decided we were going to do the launch, every single Thursday we've been meeting. What was the time? 9 o'clock or 9:30, 10 o'clock. Every single Thursday without fail, we've been meeting to put this together. I'd like to thank Shanice Khan from HSRC. Could we please give Shanice a round of applause? They've really made sure that we were able to do this. Koliwe Dali, Lindsay Bansi, right? Yeah, I thought so. I don't know why I thought something else. Angie Richardson, as well as Lynette. Could we please just give them a round of applause for... What's that? Shanaz, I note you on the screen, but we'd like to also thank you for just making sure that this process happens. We'd like to thank our sound and technicians, Antonio Erasmus from HSRC, as well as Samuel. Thank you for doing a good job. There was no drama, there was no chaos. I'm really grateful for that. So thank you for that. And the last thing I want to say while I still have the floor, you will notice this cake that I intend to eat right here next to me. Could I invite, could I invite the Black Sash staff to come up, please? Today, it coincides that we are 67 years old. That's 6 and 7. I bet very few of you are 67 years. And so today, it actually happens to be our real anniversary. And so it just shows that this is work that actually transcends generations. Because one interesting thing about being in Black Sash is that, oh, my mother used to be, oh my God, you know, exactly. And that's an important aspect of it. And so for the work that's been done, which has culminated in this book, and now the chapter going forward and the work that we're taking, I would just like someone to blow the candle. Are we singing happy birthday to Black Sash? Yeah? Okay, sure. Who's leading the troops? Yeah?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Black Sash. Happy birthday to you. Hip hip.
Great, thank you. So in celebration of this, we've organized some snacks outside, and the cake is available for cutting. Oh, after we cut it. Yes, after we cut it. So thank you so much for joining us today. And on the screen, we will eat on your behalf, I promise.